how would you work with the problem of inclusive, exclusive categories in these times? Projection, scapegoating. And the other question that's, I think, is related, where do the movements of cancel culture or Black Lives Matter fit, or how to make sense of these movements into this intelligence model?
Yeah. So one of the things we're seeing is we're seeing out of control versions of this identification system or the system of communion. The way in which reality works is fractal. And so communities or identities embed themselves in each other. That's how it works. And so in a normal kind of traditional world, you can be a family, in a neighborhood, in a community, right? In a nation, in a church. And it's like, it's all embedded. And you can also participate in all these different identities. You can be in a club, or you can be in this and that. And so it all kind of works together. So one of the problems we're having right now is that, let's say, kind of woke culture has understood the problem of identity, right? They understand it. They understand the problem of exclusion. But the answer they give is that they want to account for everything. They want everything to fit. Now, the problem is that it's impossible. It's an impossible, and it's even a dangerous thing. And there are a lot of ancient traditions which help you understand that. So for example, like you have the idea in Jewish law that you have to leave a fringe on your vestment, or you have to leave the corners of the field untilled for the strangers. All of these patterns are there to manifest the fact that you can't have a system which is both coherent and complete at the same time. You can't. Those two things.
Let me interrupt just for a second.
Go for it.
Well, the ziggurat answers that question too, because people can be included at a higher level of unity and excluded at a lower. And so part of this is conceptual confusion. It's like the problem of category is the problem of inclusion and exclusion. And exclusion can lead to demonization very easily. And that's a big problem, a fundamental problem. But the problem that you're talking about that's manifesting socially is a consequence of this lack of understanding of the hierarchy of value. So the people who are pushing diversity, inclusivity, and equity are saying something like, look, we're all divinely human. And you object to that by saying, well, yes, but we still need to differentiate ourselves into specialized categories. And we have to think through that very carefully so that we subdue things properly.
No, exactly. And so what's happened is that people want to make inclusivity the only value, really the only value, because of the problem of exclusion. And so what happens, and this is what I'm going to say is going to seem radical to some, but what we're seeing in this process is the actual destruction of the world. And it's actually this type of thinking can actually destroy the world, or lead to absolute tyranny, one or the other, or maybe one causing the other. So imagine you have a basketball team, right? You have a basketball team. The purpose of the team is to play basketball, to win the championship, to do this. But then you say, no. The purpose of the team is inclusion. And now imagine you do that for every single level of reality and every single communion. You say that the purpose of your group is inclusion. But so then you sacrifice the actual purpose of the group, which is to play basketball, to win games and everything, for inclusion. And you end up doing that in all aspects of reality. What you're doing is you're devouring the purpose. You're eating it. It's like it's becoming eaten by this thing. It's a monster. It's like it's the potential. It's like potentiality is infinite. It's like you need to let all this potential in. And so we were like, this is wrong, right? You're excluding this potential. So we need to kind of bring all this potential in. So what it does is it's like a sea monster that comes up and devours the identities. And so either it brings about a kind of fragmentation and chaos and breakdown, but often the world can't sustain itself that way. So what it tends to do is it tends to lead into a kind of absolute identity. And it's weird because the way it seems to be happening, it's just the strangest thing, is that it's like people are trying to make inclusivity as the tyrannical system itself, which is just, seems like it's not possible, but that seems to be what's happening, is that inclusivity is going to turn into tyranny. But what's important is that gesture is going to create something like absolute scapegoats. Absolute scapegoats, which is that those that will refuse to participate in this weird principle of inclusivity will be absolutely excluded. It's the only sin, and it's an unforgivable sin. And so we're moving toward that, and it's kind of scary to see it happen.
Well, it's terminologically part of an assault on the idea of the patriarchy, and that means that it's assault on the idea of pyramidal categorization itself, because that's assimilated in the indiscriminate imagination with tyranny and the identification of tyranny with the act of categorization itself. And so this is a deep struggle, right? So if the act of categorization is part of subduing, and that's part of the manifestation of the word, then the assault on that under the guise of destructuring the patriarchy is an assault on that principle itself, and an identification of the principle of discrimination with the principle of tyranny.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that, for example, like the idea that the word discrimination has become an absolute evil is insane. It's an insane moment because you discriminate all the time. You're constantly discriminating. Discriminating is like a normal aspect of reality, which is that you're constantly judging. Like you're constantly kind of discriminating whether or not this piece of paper is the right one to scribble on or to print on, and you're discriminating whether or not this is the right keyboard for my computer. It's like you're constantly discriminating. But the fact that we've even made that word into
well, you also said, Jonathan, that God himself said that capacity for discrimination transformed good into very good. Yeah. So now think of what an assault on that means. It means an assault on our ability to distinguish between that which is higher and that which is lower. God.
Yeah. And so, but there's a way in which, like, it's important to understand that there's a way in which this system, like let's say that especially when you see it in many versions, but in the Christian system, the one I know the best, the way in which it kind of heals itself, or the way in which it deals with this problem, is that at the very, very top of the hierarchy is something like identity. And then right above that identity is something like sacrifice. That is, the pyramid is kenotic, it's self-emptying. And so the highest thing is the king, and then the very highest thing is the martyr. And that's super important. It's super important to understand that. And it's technically accurate, right? In the sense that in order for the leg of a chair to be part of the chair, it has to sacrifice itself to the higher purpose. It has to, because it can't just be a leg of a chair. It has to participate in the higher pattern. And so the highest point of the pattern is the negation of identity. And this might be a little hard for people to kind of get, but it'll help you understand a lot of Christian symbolism. The highest point of identity is negation of identity. But the problem is that now what we have is something like, we don't realize that negation of identity leads to identity. Then there's an identity going like this, and then there's a negation of identity below, or a breakdown, and they're confusing the negation of identity below with the negation of identity above, which is the capacity to sacrifice yourself for a higher good, and the capacity to sacrifice yourself for your own parts. And so the chair also has to sacrifice its purity in order to be able to exist, because all chairs have idiosyncrasies. All chairs have aspects of it that aren't the pure chair, or else the chairs couldn't exist. And so the identity of things sacrifice themselves above, they give themselves up, right? So imagine you take your best sheep and you give it up to God, right? You give it up to God. Or you die as a martyr. But then there's also a way in which that which is above then sacrifices itself for that which is below. So that's one of the ways in which we kind of deal with the problem. Because so it's not like a kind of Nietzschean will to power thing. It's not at all that, right? The real hierarchy ends in self-sacrifice, right? That's why the cross is at the top of the hill, right? That's why the mystery at the top of the hill is in mystical terms, we talk about the divine unknowing, like that you reach knowledge, you reach gnosis. And then when you reach the top of gnosis, the next step is unknowing. It's actually a form of divine darkness. That's the highest form of mystical union. And this is how one of the ways in which the system can balance itself out. Because it is true that sometimes we struggle to think that the highest thing is, okay, let's think of it this way. The highest thing of the team is the quarterback that everybody loves and everybody worships. And it's like, yeah, that is the top of the team, but it's only the top of the team when the quarterback sacrifices himself above to the purpose of the team and sacrifices himself below to make the other team members participate in the team. If he doesn't do that, then he's not going to be at the top. He's going to be a tyrant. He's not going to be able to get the team to cohere. All of these things are going to happen. And so this is something which, like I said, it's maybe a bit harder to understand. I really didn't expect to go into this in this conversation, but it might be important to understand the problem of identity and how it can be solved, let's say, through this pattern.